Any questions here?
Hi, Francis. I wanted to ask whether there was a valid distinction to be drawn between consciousness knowing itself as happiness, perhaps more ordinary more ordinary in daily life, a sense of worry-free well-being, and the knowing of pure consciousness that perhaps has attributes such as knowing itself without perceptions or with simultaneity.
If I can make an analogy, it's like the space and the physical objects within the space. The space is everywhere. It's also within the objects. The objects occupy a portion of the space, right? So the space is everywhere. It is more tangible, if I can use this word, between the objects, right, than it is within the objects. But nevertheless, the space is everywhere, between and within the objects. It is the same with consciousness, within and between the perceptions. So between the perception, it is unalloyed, so to speak. During the perception, it is colored by the nature of the perception. So that in the presence of bodily sensations or feelings, the color that this happiness we take is the color of love. In the presence of thought, rational thinking, it will take the form of intelligence or understanding or clarity. In the presence of external sense perception, beauty. So it is, in a sense, colored by the nature of the objects. And although I just described three main colors, there are all kinds of colors in between: humor, sweetness, sweet sadness. I mean, there are all kinds of colors that this gratitude, that this happiness may take. In a sense, it is more intense when it is uncolored between objects. Just as the space is more tangible, which is in fact the opposite, or more intangible, between physical objects.
Is it important for the truth lover to know pure consciousness, unalloyed, to really be able to live free of fear and desire?
But we wouldn't be a truth lover unless we knew pure consciousness. it is this knowledge of independence and freedom of pure consciousness that in fact turns us into a truth lover. It's just that the mind, at least in the beginning, doesn't realize what has happened because the mind has no recollection of this experience. So the mind can only infer that the experience of pure consciousness has taken place by looking at the damage it has created. In hindsight, the change that has occurred. So that would be the first type of assessment, and then that's a short-term assessment. The long-term assessment would be a convergence towards happiness and harmony in one's life, and serendipity.
Thank you.
Good morning, Francis. I have a few questions. The first question, from the perspective of consciousness, is there a difference between observing and perceiving?
Well, let's use three: observing, perceiving, contemplating. Both observing and contemplating somehow require perception, require perceiving. So, perceiving or consciousnessing is a common ground of both contemplating and observing. The difference between contemplating and observing is that in observation there is an agenda towards the phenomenon. In other words, the attention is focused onto a specific phenomenon because of some agenda. And this agenda can be driven by ignorance or not. If it is driven by fear and desire, it is driven by ignorance, this observing. I'm careful, I observe the people around me because I'm afraid of them. I'm afraid, I don't feel comfortable with people. Because I feel separate. Because I identify with this body, and this body could be damaged by them. But observation can also be devoid of ignorance, such as a scientist observing bugs under his microscope. Now, but in both cases, the emphasis is on the object being observed. In contemplation requires perceiving also, but the emphasis is on consciousness itself. So it could be said that in wisdom, contemplation is the default mode of perception, of perceiving. And if required, it moves to observing. Whereas in ignorance, there is no contemplation. And perceiving is strictly about observing. Either observing for out of fear and desire, or sometimes also observing just in an innocent way.
So there's this relationship between the body and the mind where they can affect one another. And it seems like that I can have a myriad of thoughts and I can just perceive them as they are and let them float away as clouds. And there doesn't have to be any bodily response. It is only when I give certain thoughts my attention or identification or whatever, that's when it can trigger a sensation in the body.
Yeah, when that which I am observing is important to me as a separate person. That's when it triggers reactions in the body, when it becomes important to me as a separate person.
So I noticed that there are times when, during meditation, just being able to perceive, again, thoughts without any kind of attachment or any kind of whatever. Many times there's a point at which the thoughts, the frequency with which they come, they slow down.
Yes.
And the space between them increases. And even the body has a response. The breathing slows down and the heart rate slows down. And so what is that an indication of?
I don't see what you want me to say.
Is there a point at which staying in that?
At which?
At which, while perceiving in that way, the thoughts would just continue to slower and slower and slower. I mean, is that kind of the?
Not necessarily, because then it would be boring to have no thoughts. We are thinking animals.
Maybe, depending on the thought.
We are thinking animals, but we have to think in a natural way, in a spontaneous, uncontrived way. That's all. And some people think a lot, some people think less and live more in their senses. Some people live more in their bodies. So we are different. So the mix between thoughts, bodily sensations, and sense perceptions varies from one moment to another, but also from an individual to another. And the presence of thought is not a sign of ignorance, and the absence of thought is not a sign of wisdom. The sign of wisdom is the absence of worries. That's why I made the distinction in observation, what I call observation, between ignorant observation with worries, fear, desire, and innocent observation, when you are moved by being interested in something. You know? So, in the meditation, the emphasis is on the contemplation. So meditation, in a sense, the practice of meditation for 45 minutes is the practice of contemplation. It's not the practice of observation. So during our daily activities, we cannot always be in contemplation because our daily activities require observation. And that's not a problem, but it requires only, in fact, innocent observation.
Thank you.
I think I heard you say yesterday to find for yourself that there is only one reality. One method would be to act as if there was only one reality.
Yes.
Could you give an example of how a person would act if there were only one reality?
For instance, if life creates for us circumstances or a context which may seem to be adverse to us or detrimental, or we have to be open to the possibility that these events or this set of events, in fact, comes from universal harmony. And then our action or our reaction towards the event will be very different. In other words, there are practical steps that we have to take. But there is no bitterness inside. My mom, she was on paper an atheist. And she believed she was. However, most of the time she was angry at life. She was not that angry at people, but she was angry at life. So most of her life, it was a very long life. Most of her life she was angry at life. For 95 years, 96 years. It's a long time to be angry at life. And who she was really angry at was God. So she was an atheist angry at God. Because if you are truly a materialist, right, an atheist, there is nobody to be angry at, nobody is doing it to you, right? So there is no reason to be angry. So that was her place of inconsistency. You see, so and that's terrible, because even when people are young, when they are young, they are complaining that they don't have the correct relationships, that when they are older, they are complaining that the health is not good, that the retirement is not sufficient, etc. So there is always a reason to be unhappy. If you want to be unhappy, you always find, I think Trump, filthy, wealthy president having realized what he wants, I'm sure he finds reason to be unhappy. There is no valid reason to be unhappy whatsoever. The other example is in your dealing with somebody else. if there is only one reality, your reality, which is your true self, and the self you are dealing with are the same. So that requires, or this understanding, or simply your being open to this possibility, will dictate a different attitude towards this person. And so will dictate a different type of relationship from your side, whether that is well received or not, but it will always be received. You see? And that's what I meant by, to live our life as if there were only one reality.
And that one reality is consciousness and the individual self.
There is no individual self, really.
The thoughts and feelings that come up as the individual self.
Yes, thoughts and feelings come up because we believe that consciousness is individual. Even if we are open to the possibility that consciousness is not individual, because we have been conditioned in the past to think in a certain way along certain lines, behavior or thoughts that are that are ignorant will come back out of habit, so to speak. And the only way to liberate ourselves from that is precisely to try the alternate possibility in our deed, but also in our thoughts. To make, in a way, a deliberate effort to think along the new lines, to decide in our life along the new lines, since we cannot be certain, one way or the other, as to whether consciousness is universal or not. So we have to be open to this possibility doesn't mean solely to be open to it intellectually, but to be open to it in the way we think, in the way we decide, in the way we act, in the way we relate to others. So it means if I am open to it intellectually, but every time I deal with somebody else, I deal with that person on a separate basis, then I am not really open to it. I am kidding myself, thinking I am open to it. It doesn't mean that I am going to condone everything other people do. Because although I always speak to consciousness, I can tell consciousness in this person, look, consciousness, you're beautiful, you're smart, you know better. Why are you acting like this? You see what I mean? But it will be better received because it comes from a place of love instead of coming from a place of hate. We are done here for the time being? Yeah.
You mentioned yesterday that there's nothing prior to consciousness. Where it seems like there's something like consciousness is born from a nothingness or something.
It depends. It depends on what you call consciousness. what is your definition of consciousness?
Like the manifest world.
Oh, the manifest world is that which consciousness is aware of. It is not consciousness, right? The manifest world is that which consciousness is aware of. It is not consciousness.
There isn't awareness prior to consciousness?
It depends, again, how you define consciousness. There are usually, people define consciousness in three ways, usually. One is the content of consciousness, perceptions, etc. The second definition comes from the belief that there is no consciousness in the absence of perception, in the absence of object. So, this definition implicitly denies the existence of consciousness between perceptions. And since perceptions are mind-based, if there is no consciousness between perceptions, it means that, and perceptions are mind, it means that every time there is consciousness, there is mind. And therefore, this view of consciousness attaches consciousness to mind, and mind is limited. So this view of consciousness, in fact, boils down to equating consciousness with mind. And finally, there is my definition of consciousness. The reality which is hearing these words right now. The reality which is hearing these words right now. And if there is only one reality, the reality which is hearing these words right now is this only reality. And reality means that it is prior to everything. It is prior to mind, of course. It is prior to every mind. And it is prior to this universe we perceive. So that's why it's important to define consciousness in terms of the reality that perceives. And why do I bring this reality aspect in the first place? It's because it is for us beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is something real in perception. In other words, there is something that is irreducible in the act of perception, such that even if that which is perceived is an illusion, like the night dream, nevertheless there is something real to it. It was not nothing, this night dream. Whatever I was perceiving, the beautiful island in with a pink sky and sapphire blue water, this beautiful island I was perceiving in my dream has never existed anywhere. It was a total illusion, but perceiving was there. There was something real to it. It cannot be denied in bulk. The island can be denied, yes, but the dream cannot be denied. So there is an element of reality to perceiving, which is for each of us beyond the shadow of a doubt. Now, this element of reality is very important. I call it consciousness. Consciousness is a reality that perceives. And we know there is an element of reality. How do we know that? I cannot prove it to you. But at the same time, you know that no matter what, the fact that perceiving is going on right now cannot be denied. No matter what. That which is perceived can be an illusion, but perceiving cannot be denied. So since that which is perceived could be an illusion, as is the case during the night dream, the reality, the element of reality, of perception, must be on the perceiver side rather than on the perceived side. You see, that's why it ties together with consciousness being the reality that perceives.
It is in your definition, does consciousness includes existence and non-existence?
Non-existence is a useless word because non-existence doesn't exist.
Nothingness.
Nothingness doesn't exist.
Emptiness. Formlessness.
Nothingness, absolute nothingness doesn't exist. Absence of objects can exist, yes. It's called pure consciousness. But pure consciousness, which we can call emptiness, or the void of the Buddhist shunya, is pregnant with everything that arises out of it and that it creates. So it is not an absolute nothingness. It is an absence of objects, but not an absolute absence.
But consciousness has sentience?
Objects have, we have to define sentience. Sentience is a quality of some objects that we ascertain based on our human observation. We say a human being is sentient. A lizard is sentient. A mosquito is sentient. A flower, yes and no. A flower is not sentient in the way we are sentient, but I looked at the little flowers. Here, there are plenty of those. When it gets cold, they close. When the sun is there, they open. So they must be sentient somehow. You see? So sentience is and there are other objects for which we just as for the flower, we can put a question mark. You know, is an electron sentient? Yes, in a certain way, yes. It seems to be. In other words, sentience is a quality that we human beings, based on our very narrow window through which we observe the world, it's a quality that we attribute to certain objects and not to others, as far as we know. Consciousness is an experience. Consciousness is the experience of perceiving. So it's an inner experience. It's a subjective experience.
So awareness can't exist without consciousness?
And you are using the word awareness and consciousness. For me, I don't have two words. Consciousness is the reality that perceives, okay? What is awareness? How does it differ from the reality that perceives?
I just see awareness as an emptiness and nothingness, and consciousness is like the light of the world.
You mean that which perceives the world, right? But we say I am aware, and we say I am conscious. We say I am aware of this. Then perhaps in your vocabulary, which for me consciousness and awareness are identical, perhaps in your vocabulary, what you call consciousness is what I call consciousness with objects, and what you call awareness is consciousness without objects. Now, what is better in my definition is that it is the same word being used. They are not two entities. Whereas if you use consciousness and awareness, it seems like you have two identities. That when I perceive the world, I am consciousness, and between two perceptions, I am awareness, but like I become something else. Like denying that it is the same awareness that perceives the world and that perceives itself in the absence of the world. You see? So it's important to recognize the oneness of consciousness, that throughout, no matter whether there is perception or not, consciousness is. That's why I prefer the use of one single word for, and then they are synonymous, awareness, consciousness, fine. In French, we have only one word, consciousness. We don't have the word awareness. And we do fine without it.
Consciousness then, in your definition, includes like the masculine and feminine expressions, like the Shiva Shakti, the dark and the light,
All of that is the Shiva is the unmanifested aspect, and Shakti is the manifested aspect of consciousness. But in both cases, they are both consciousness. Just as in India, there is only Brahman, whether Brahman is manifested as Shakti or unmanifested as Shiva. You know, it's called Advaita. So it's a bad way to talk about Advaita if you have two elements, consciousness and awareness. So you have to simplify it and see. Sometimes some teachers or the translators of these Indian teachers have made a distinction between consciousness and awareness because they have given consciousness the meaning I give to the word mind. You see. So you have to understand in context when you read books what they mean.
I would define consciousness as the I am.
As what?
I am.
Let me tell you something, that's fine. But when you perceive, isn't it you who perceives? No? You perceive, right? When you perceive, As I speak, it is you who hears. Right? It's not somebody else. And the you, the Jacqueline who hears, and the Jacqueline who is the same. Because if Jacqueline were not, Jacqueline couldn't perceive. Right? So obviously, the Jacqueline who perceives is the Jacqueline who is. So therefore, there is no distinction between the one who perceives and the one who is. They are one and the same. In other words, being and consciousness and self are the same. It's just that when we use consciousness, we emphasize the perceiving quality of the self. When we call it being, we emphasize the reality, quality of the self. But just because the consciousness is real, they are one and the same, you see. When we read books about spirituality, first, many teachings lack clarity. So that we have to accept that. Because many people have had spiritual experiences, but then they speak about those. And people get interested in it. But they have no clarity about their own experience. You know, Ramana Maharshi, he had this insightful experience when he was 70. But he didn't know what to do with that. It took him 10 years, living in a cave. And at some point, he came across the Advaitic texts and says, oh, that's what has happened to me. And then he got clarity, and then he was able to speak about it. But in the beginning, he would go to temples. He knew there was something sacred about it, something divine. He would go to Shiva temple before he moved to Arunachala. So, because there are many teachings who lack clarity. And then the teachers who were clear sometimes have been translated by translators who lacked clarity, and so the message has been distorted. Or even teachers who had clarity may have be using a different, the words I am using with a different meaning. That's why it's important to be very precise as to the definition of the words we use, you see? And to understand in any given context, because in this way we avoid confusion. One of the arguments in favor of following only one teacher is to avoid this type of confusion. Because then we are in a clear, hopefully, if the teacher is clear in his teachings, we are on a clear path, unencumbered. And then once we have reached this clarity, then it is okay to explore other teachings, because then in context we will understand, because now we have a clear view. You see, it's like someone who studies mathematics. He needs to start with a very clear textbook, not too big, clear, that goes right to the point. And then he can explore other textbooks easily because he knows the basic notions. So, going back to that, for me, consciousness is the reality which is hearing these words right now. So it's not mind. For instance, this definition of consciousness works perfectly with the common view, the common materialist view of the world, that which is perceiving right now is the brain. That consciousness is a quality of the brain. You see? So say, okay, you say that the reality which is perceiving right now is the brain. Now, what is the reality of the brain? The brain doesn't exist independently from the body, so you could say it is the body that perceives. Yes, but the body doesn't exist independently from the rest of the universe. The reality of the body and the reality of the universe are the same. So therefore, the reality that perceives, even in this limited assumption that the brain perceives, the reality that perceives is the reality of the universe. But at that moment, what is important is to understand that we have moved beyond the limitation of a localized object called a human body. At that moment, we have reached the universality. At that moment, even starting from this questionable premise that it is the brain that perceives, using rational, scientific arguments, we are led to this conclusion that the reality that perceives is bigger than us human beings. And I am the reality that perceives, right? So my reality is bigger than this body. It is really unaffected by the disappearance of this body. So normally, if people who were truly scientific up to all the way, they would become sages. Because you become sage the moment you move beyond the limitation of the human body. As the understanding of your reality.
Even if it's been seen that consciousness is the only one reality, there's still tendencies in the body-mind, or there's still maybe dormant ignorance that hasn't been met, that still has to...
Yes, but what we have to understand is that if I put two chairs side by side, the chair of ignorance and the chair of wisdom, I cannot sit simultaneously on those two chairs. Even if I have a very big behind, because these chairs are not benches, right? They are not a bench. They are armchairs. So even with a big behind, I cannot sit on both chairs. I have to choose one or the other. It is the same. At any single moment, either I believe to be a separate consciousness or not, and that's it. I'm sitting in one of those chairs at every given moment.
But in that sense, it can seem or appear or play out as a process in a way?
Yes, there is a process. In other words, in ignorance, I sit always in the same chair, which is in fact very uncomfortable. It's like someone who has been told from childhood, you better keep sitting in this chair, because the other chair there, you die. So, although the chair is uncomfortable, this guy keeps sitting on that chair. And then, at some point, he's traveling, and he has a guy sitting in front of him who is not sitting on the ignorance chair. He's sitting on the wisdom chair. So he asks him, "What are you doing here? I mean, you're going to die." And the guy said, No, I've tried both. This one is perfectly comfortable. The other one stinks, you know. Why don't you try it? Oh, I would never do that. My mom has told me that if I sit there, I'm going to die. You see? But baby, look, I'm comfortable, you know. So after a while, you know, don't believe what your mom was telling you. After all, she wasn't that comfortable in her life. You see, so after a while, the guy tries, you know, hop to the other chair. Immediately he goes back to the old chair, you know, because he doesn't want, he's still afraid of what may happen. But as time goes by, he experiences more often the comfort of the other chair, and finally he ends the journey sitting on the right chair. The chair of wisdom should be on the right. Yeah, right and wrong, right? The right chair, the wrong chair.
Thank you.
So I've been, I guess, going back and forth between the chairs, and can our journey kind of be like going up a mountain where you kind of go up and down, but over time it's upward?
Over time, you sit for longer and longer periods of time in the right chair, and you sit on rarer and rarer occasion on the wrong chair, and for shorter and shorter durations. So you can express that as ups and downs, and with a general ascending curve. Yes.
Yeah, it seems like sometimes Shiva or something pulls the rug out from under me, and have a hard time finding the wisdom chair in a timely manner or as quickly as I'd like. I opened this book at random from the library. It said, this is Nisargadatta Maharaj. He said, pure consciousness has never had an experience. And how do I trust something that I can't have an experience of?
What does it say in this book? Pure consciousness.
Pure consciousness has never had an experience, and we've had this conversation before. It's like,
what does that mean? I mean, I don't care about books like that. The guy didn't speak English really, so it was translated by a third translator who the understanding of what the teacher was saying was doubtful in the first place, and then there was a Westerner there listening to the translation, not understanding the original words, and translating that with its own, or with his or her own filter. So when you get, at the end of the day, you end up with a sentence like that, which out of context doesn't mean anything, you know. consciousness had never had an experience. What does that mean?
It reminds me of our conversation.
Let me tell you my definition of consciousness. Consciousness is experiencing. Consciousness experiences all the time. Consciousness is the experiencer in chief. So to say consciousness never had an experience, what do you want me to comment? I have commented on that. That's it. That was my comment.
Yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, because we can split hairs forever on that, but it's just...
It's that, it's almost like, how do I trust something that the experience of comes and goes, as it were? I mean, you know.
No. The experience of consciousness doesn't come and go. It is always here. Right in this moment you are consciousnessing. That's why you cannot trust anything that comes and goes. I agree with you. You can only trust that which is always with you.
I mean, I realize that if I feel a disharmony, it's just the mind again.
Disharmony, you said?
That I'm not in. I'm not living as.
Disharmony comes from the belief I am a fragment.
Right. So I fall back into the belief of separation.
Yeah. Okay, I have to answer questions online now. And we see at the end whether we still have time. So, I start with the questions of last Sunday that I had left unanswered. Your thing is not broadcasting. Yeah, mine is. Yes, so if you have problems, we are broadcasting now in the on the high resolution channel. So if you are on the low resolution, change channels. Christian, I had to see my mother waiting for an operation in the hospital. I felt her fear. Also, she experienced tremendous pain, which was hard for me to take. That brought back to my mind a question that I have wanted to ask you for a long time, but for some reason never did. You once explained that the purpose of physical pain is to signal that something is wrong with the body and health needs to be organized. But why is pain going on even after we understood its message? I said also that there was another function to pain, to physical pain, which is to accelerate the healing process by focusing all the energy of the body onto the area which is affected. It seems to me that the body is like a child that keeps crying because it feels the need to urgently signal that it is hungry and afraid not to get food. Exactly. Exactly. There is a purpose for the child crying. In fact, the shrieking sound that a child may emit To the child, it's not a problem. He likes it. To our ears, it's unbearable when you're in a plane, and you have the big And I was observing a baby, a young child doing that, and I could see it was really funny that he was enjoying the sound he was making. So as soon as the mother would let go of him, he would go, and it was such a high pitch level that he could reach. It was amazing. He was like a super soprano. I don't know where I am here with that. It seems to me that the body is like a child that keeps crying because it feels the need to urgently signal that it is hungry and afraid not to get food. Exactly, and the body, this part of the body is crying that it was the attention of all the rest of the body to come to the rescue. Or like someone who keeps ringing the doorbell, although he can see that someone is on its way to open the door. Of course, a hungry child or an animal cannot assess the situation fully, but a grown-up and mature reaction would be to stop crying once it is recognized that food is now being prepared for us, and therefore, so to speak, help is on its way. Or to stop ringing the doorbell. Not necessarily with German doctors, apparently. They have to learn something about pain management. Now the body keeps producing excruciating pain long after help has been organized, or even in situations when healing is no more possible. It doesn't seem intelligent to me, also not loving. I agree with you. There is something wrong in our hospital and with our doctors, that they don't dispense pain alleviating medicine the way they should. Also not loving. So I guess I am judging God here. Can you help me seeing once more that even here everything is well and unfolding as it should? Perhaps that which was required is someone to advocate with the team for some pain management issues. I once had a thoracic surgery, which is one of the most painful surgeries. And the surgeon told me, well, and it was a long time ago, it was in 1994. He told me, 10 years ago, you would have suffered a great deal of pain after surgery. But now we have a pain management unit. It was at UCSF in San Francisco Hospital. But now we have a pain management unit, and you won't feel anything. And he was right. Upon waking up, the pain was excruciating, but immediately they put me on this morphine drip in my epidural. And for 5 days, I was pain-free, and when I was released, the pain was very manageable. On the other hand, lately I had a minor surgery. The pain was excruciating for months, but especially at the hospital. But the doctor, they say, oh, no. So, and it would be very easy to use the same procedure to keep the patient, to make this minor surgery pain-free. But no, they couldn't care less, in fact. They couldn't care less. I was really pissed off to see this carelessness of some medical it's easy to put an epidural, and to make someone pain-free. And then you have a device next to your bed, and for the time required, you're without pain. Now, I mentioned also, Christian, that also the spiritual mission of pain, of physical pain, is to make us understand that this body at some point has become a lemon and that it's time to change vehicle. So that may be because there is pain at the end of life, and this pain enables us to detach ourselves from a body which instead of being a source of pleasure has become a source of pain. So that we can leave this body without regrets, somehow. Lois, if this path takes everything from us, does it also take memory for functioning in daily life? Why? She starts with an assumption. This path takes everything from us. That sounds like, did I say that? This path takes everything from us. No. This path takes only from us a mistake we make. That's all. The rest, we keep it. So we keep everything. The only thing we lose is a mistake. That's all. So this path doesn't take anything from us. Does it also take memory for functioning in daily life? Unless you have Alzheimer's. I have noticed a letting go of effort to remember things like, what day is it? There is fear involved, and I wonder if it is pathological or part of the past. I guess it's, with all the portable devices we have, we don't have to memorize all kinds of things, what day it is today. I have it here on my watch. There is fear involved, and I wonder if it is pathological or part of the past. Yeah, fear is always pathological. I mean, what's the point if not knowing which day we are? You take a look at your smartphone, and you will know. You ask your neighbor. I usually know which day it is because I play tennis, and I know with whom I play tennis on every given day. So, and on weekends we have this dialogue. So, if there is a dialogue, it must be weekend. I recall the story you told about your teacher forgetting who you were in these last years. Oh yes, my teacher, he had a big stroke that had devastated his mind, so it was worse than Alzheimer's. How does Alzheimer's or stroke fit in with this awakening? It fits in like any other phenomenon appearing in this presence. It's just phenomena. Sophie, this one is in French. I have to translate. Once the understanding is complete, that the experience of being a separate entity disappears, and that we are knowingly the consciousness within which the body-mind we believe to be manifests. Does the relation with the world, with others, with this very same body-mind who bears our name, does this relation become similarly intimate, although impersonal? yes, it becomes intimate. In that sense that everything is me. You see, so in that sense it becomes intimate. The question arises, I keep reading, from the fact that when we believe to be a man, a woman, the relation we have with the person we believe to be is much more intimate than the one we have with any other manifested being. So, is it that when this identification falls away or becomes wider and embraces the totality, does this intimate relationship widens equally up to the totality? Yes, the answer is yes. But the beauty is that you can kind of willingly contribute to this widening. Oh, a long question. Abhinandita. It's pretty vivid that understanding in its own nature is independent of anything which is understood. There is no separate understander apart from understanding, which is non-phenomenal in nature. Moreover, it happening between two perceptions, and during the perceptions, its transcendental immanent nature feels to be absolutely true, but not with conviction due to a question of nature of perceptions. Since consciousness is present between and in perceptions, it seems the perceptions don't stand any longer as perceptions, but are experienced more in a timeless manner, losing their quality of being perceived, which makes them perceptions in the first place. The question is that the beginningless and endless qualities of consciousness seems to be coloring all perceptions in which they lose their qualities of being such as perceptions. But being perceptions, they do have a perceived end and beginning. It seems like a paradox in direct experience, and it would be very helpful if you could say something on the same. Yes, what I can say is use a metaphor for that. So I go back to the question. I hope I understand your question. On the one hand, perceptions, each perception has a beginning and an end in time. But once we become aware of the presence in which they appear, this presence in which they appear is beginningless and endless. And at the same time, it is the substance of which the perceptions are made. So that the perceptions seem to lose their qualities, their time-like qualities, and to become timeless-like, let's put it this way. their time-like qualities being to have a beginning and an end in time, and their timeless quality being to be consciousness-like. And the question is kind of, which one is it? Which one is it between these two perceptions of the perceptions? They coexist. And let me use the following metaphor. You are watching a movie on TV. So there are, in fact, two scenes that I could describe. One is the scene in the movie, you know, the Bollywood dancers, right, in the movie. And then there is you on your armchair watching the TV screen and eating some goodies. The question is, which one is true? Of course, the one of you being in the armchair watching the TV is the true one. But both are simultaneously going on. The movie is going on the screen. You're watching the movie and eating the chapatis or whatever. Is also simultaneous with the watching of the movie. So the reality comes as a block. It's only in hindsight that we make the distinction between the movie on the screen and the eating of the chapatis in the room. But in actual experiencing, such a division doesn't exist. It's all one, and it's all consciousness. There's never been such a duality. And he goes on saying, as to there is no boundaries between that which is understood and that which understands. What does a difference appear between them, as in that which is understood seems limited, and that which understands isn't, or the difference is just one of the things being understood and nothing to do with the real difference between the understood and understanding. Yes, you see, the answer to this question is as follows. That which understand is real. In other words, it belongs to the level of ultimate reality. That which is understood, unless it is reality itself in a spiritual investigation. But in ordinary understanding, that which is understood belongs to a lesser level. By lesser, I mean less real. Not of relative reality, but not absolute reality. Now, we are always mistaken when we try to evaluate a difference between two elements that don't belong to the same plane. We cannot compare if two elements, if they don't belong to the same level of reality. And that's also something that has been sorted out in your question. When you took a difference appears between that which is understood and that which understands. Yes, there is a difference, but this difference is that one is real and the other is less real. So they cannot be compared by being artificially placed on the same level. They are on two different levels. For instance, let me give you an example. You dream that someone wants to take your money in your dream. And it is legitimate in your dream to ask yourself as to what his motives are, right? Because then when you are in the dream, the guy who wants to take your money and the one whose money is going to be taken belong to the same universe, if you will. Let's assume you wake up from the dream. I'm asking the question, do you feel legitimate upon waking up from the dream to question the motives of the guy who wants to take your money? No, you couldn't care less. You say what I mean. Attila. I would like to know about the relation of consciousness and money. What is a natural relation that expresses itself if one acts out of awareness regarding financial wealth or working for money? Is there some rule of thumb how to relate to money? And for asking for money for spiritual advice. Okay. What is money? Money is a very smart creation that facilitates exchanges of goods and services. Prior to money, it was very difficult to exchange goods and services because, let's assume I have some sugar, too much sugar, but in order to bake the cake, I need flour. But my neighbor has flour. Unfortunately, my neighbor, he has flour, but he doesn't need sugar because he has sugar too. I would like to exchange my sugar against his flour, but it's not possible because he doesn't want my sugar. What he needs is eggs. So I need to find another guy who has eggs and who needs sugar, which is not easy to find. You know? And then once I have found this other guy, then it works. I give him sugar, he gives me eggs. I go to the flour guy, I give him eggs. I get the flour, and I can bake my cake. So, the beauty of money is that I can buy directly the flour from the guy, and with my money, he can buy the eggs from the other guy. Much simpler. So, for all the Marxists around there, or all of those who have something against money, I tell them money is a very good and very smart thing. You know, try to live without, and come back and give me a report. So that's a way to exchange goods and services. There is something in this question that I'm going to answer because. And of course, that how to relate to money. And the last question of Attila is, and for asking for money for spiritual advice? This question Now that I have explained how money works, you go to ashrams in India, Ramana Maharshi ashram, for instance, and a lot of people say, well, Ramana Maharshi, he was not paid with money because he was paid in nature. People would come to their ashram and work. And other people would bring carrots or mangoes or whatever. And the ones who didn't have anything and were not able to work because they were disabled, they were accepted nevertheless at the ashram. And that was fair. That was perfectly fair. The ones who could contribute, contributed. The ones who couldn't were accepted without contribution. That was only fair. So here, it's not an ashram, but it's the same. In this moment, all this conversation of the internet require all kinds of investments in internet connections and internet services and cameras and equipment. And thanks to the contribution of some, it's made possible for those who don't contribute to listen to it. It's fair, It's the beauty of life. Regarding your own view of money, it should be only practical. It's a way to exchange goods and services. It's also a way to store energy. When you're young, you have a lot of energy. When you're old, you have less energy to work or zero energy to produce for yourself. So when you are young, you save this energy in the form of money, retirement accounts, 401ks, IRAs, etc. So that when you are older, you can consume the energy that you have saved when you were young and able to work. All of that is so obvious, so practical. And, I could see that in some religious circles, there is a kind of a contemptuous view of money. It was the case in feudal, in aristocratic Europe, where aristocrats, they didn't work. They considered it was beyond their grade to work. At the same time, they were exploiting the peasants who were working for them. So that was not that good. It was easy for them to be contemptuous of those who were working. Well, I'm not going to. Kevin, I understand that body and feelings, mind and personal story are rising and going in my awareness. Also the space between. And when I go with my attention into that space, I try to find the evidence that this peace-like space is not limited to the body. Nevertheless, this peace deepens and sometimes feels very energetic and happy and loving, but still stays an experience-like happening, experienced by me. So I get confused. How can I do this investigation more thoroughly? Why do I miss? The problem is that you try to capture the experience of consciousness as a mind experience. And that is simply not possible. So sooner or later, you'll have to give up. Understand, be open to the possibility that the experience of consciousness, knowing itself, is not what you project it to be. It feels simply like happiness. So it's a much simpler experience. Joy, happiness. It's not some complicated experience to look, to observe consciousness in the absence of thoughts, which is very difficult. Now, what I would be suggesting is this: to realize that in your investigation, you start from a postulate, you start from a premise which has no foundation in experience. And this premise is that consciousness is based on the body. That consciousness is the reality that perceives is dependent upon the body. Whereas, in fact, my contention is that it is just the opposite, that the body is dependent upon the reality that creates the universe with the body in it, and that through all the bodies in it perceives itself. So, this new perspective, you have to see that it is a priori as valid a perspective as the one you had of consciousness being dependent upon the body. Do your homework, investigate what arguments you have that lead you to believe that consciousness is not universal. And you'll see that there are none. If you have some, bring them here to me. Okay, now the question. Yesterday, fella asked 3 questions. Earlier you talked about the non-phenomenal qualities, truth, love, beauty, creativity, etc. of consciousness. I have a question about creativity. Would you say that every creative impulse, of course not necessarily every product, is therefore by definition an expression of consciousness? Yes, but moreover, because everything is an expression of consciousness, but in the case of creativity, it's a direct expression of consciousness, in the case of true creativity. So that was an easy one. Number 2. And if not, what is it that actually constitutes the difference between the true expression of a master and, for example, your example, Picasso? Would you say it is the God-given grace to express truth by means of their gift or genetic inheritance, and the God-given inspiration at each moment of creation? Yes. It's a combination of gift of genetic inheritance, plus, nature and nurture, plus also the effort that they have deployed to acquire the required skills, because there is a distinction between talent and skill. You can be naturally talented, but if you don't make the effort, you never acquire the skills. And then the God-given inspiration at each moment of creation, yes. So talent, skills, and inspiration. 3, if that is so, how would you define the creative impulse and inspirations that are experienced and expressed by the Picassos of this world? I wouldn't call Picasso inspired. I wouldn't call Picasso artistically inspired. He was trying to break the barrier. He was politically inspired. He was trying to break the rules, but it didn't come from the inspiration of beauty, definitely not. So or from even higher than beauty, spiritual inspiration. So Picasso is no Cézanne, Picasso is no Rembrandt, Picasso is... his creation was unhinged. So we cannot... To create something new is not necessarily creative. You know, there is a difference between artistic creativity and trying to make something new for the simple sake of making something new. And that's what modern art has become to a large extent. To seek the new at all costs. And to seek the new as a reaction to the old. And that is not necessarily artistic, especially when it is reaction against the old, it is mechanical. And therefore, there is nothing creative in it. Whereas the old could have been inspired and be beautiful. For instance, if abstract painting, which was relatively new, was simply a reaction to make something new as a reaction to figurative painting that was existing before that, although Rembrandt was creative, a purely abstract pattern on a canvas is not creative. It's just mechanical. It could be, if it were inspired. 3, if that is so, no, that was a 3 I was answering. Then when makes that expression one of ignorance? When it doesn't come directly from the source. When it comes from an ego, God knows that Picasso had a big one. Someone asks me a personal question. There is a huge urge inside me to meet you and friends at your satsang. But the problem is family issues, especially my husband cannot stand anything related to religion or spirituality. He thinks I'm doing or following some crazy ideas and people. I can fly to Temecula for any weekend satsang, but I have to lie to my husband saying that it's my official visit. What should I do? Please advise me. What should I say? No, I don't have enough element in this, on the context to really answer this question. But, you know, what I would say is this, that if you have the genuine desire to be here attending satsang, and if life, for some reason, makes it impossible for you to do that, or difficult for you to do that, it will be the same if you attend the satsang online, you see. It won't make any difference. It's different if someone tries to listen to this satsang just because it's convenient. They can listen to it from the comfort of their home. And then they are not really interested in going further other than the words. Then it's different because in this case, they are not committed to the truth. You see, when I was looking for a teacher, if I had fallen in love with the teaching of a teacher in Australia, I would have flown from Europe to Australia without hesitation. The first opportunity I would have had. I was free, I would have invested in the ticket and the trip, and I would have gone there. But let's assume I didn't have the money to do that, or I had children and it was very difficult. So my desire for it is that which was important. So if you have the desire, you attend like this, it doesn't make any difference. My high, I got it that effortful application of a technique will lead one away from oneself. However, that enthusiastic application on a line of inquiry may be helpful on the path of no longer being identified with the imaginary personal me and feel and know oneself as consciousness witnessing the entire phenomena. I am passionate and interested about a certain exercise, which is to take 5 or 10 minutes and attempt to watch the arising of thoughts, images, and let them go as they arise, not get identified with them, but remain as being present knowingly. Would you consider this helpful? I'm just checking things with you. Yes, provided every time you do this exercise, you are completely willing to do it. In other words, you make it out of joyful interest. Then yes. And there are several exercises of the same kind that you can do. In your case, you attempt to watch the arising of thoughts and images. And you let them go. You can also take a thought or an image and see it off, so to speak, as it merges with the background. So that's another way of doing it. Both are tantric tricks that are interesting. Diego, what is the right approach? Is there something to do or not? I understand the individual is activity itself, so letting go of activity would be spiritual. Not necessarily. Because if you try to let go of activity, it is also some activity. It's like the car is rolling. It's an activity, but applying the brakes is also an activity. But on the other hand, if the body-mind is full of chronic tensions and deeply rooted beliefs, there is suffering. So there is something to do. Yes. What is to do is first to understand that you're not a separate consciousness, or at least to be open to this possibility. And the second thing to do is to try to think and to feel the body and the world in accordance with this possibility. And in your case, it's the last item which is the most difficult to achieve. But you can, provided you are inclined to do it, use 5 minutes a day to trying to break the envelope that separates the body from the world out there. You have attended enough of my retreats to know the technique. Just you have to apply it. Take any of the exercises we did and just go for it. Mihai, I'm facilitating some groups with inmates in a maximum security prison in Folsom, California. I have frequently brought and read from your books inside the prison, and some inmates are at a certain level that they can understand the message and they seem deeply interested to apply it. Some of them ask me to bring those books again and read from them. However, I don't have much time with them to go into an in-depth presentation of the teaching. Would you please give me some suggestions as to how to help support and deliver the message in simple language and or simple exercises for those inmates who are really interested? They do have a lot of time on their hands, and some of them have deep eagerness and sincerity towards presence consciousness. Well, you can share with them that which you understand and that which you experience. That would be my advice. Only share that which is your understanding and that which is your experience. Not that much what is Francis' understanding and Francis' experience, but your understanding and your experience. Share that with them. Machai. Please verify the following. 1. Being consciousness is the source of mind. Minds have perception of the same object. Each one is different. When perceptions shift away, this object still remains as the same being consciousness in spite of it not being seen through any perception of the body minds. The object has therefore the same reality as the mind and does not disappear even if there is no perception of it. You are aware that we cannot really isolate an object in the world. So in fact, object is the world as a whole, because all objects are transient, and even this universe is possibly transient. So replace the word object but universe. The universe has therefore the same reality as the mind. It does not disappear even if there is no perception of it. Now, if there is no perception of it through a specific mind. 2, should we avoid repetitive activities that take us away from being totally surrendered, or perhaps we should fully dive into life situation? It seems first option is safer, but at the same time exclusive and a form of resistance. Yes. Why not do both? In other words, just like a musician, on the one hand, practice in his study, etudes, scales, arpeggios, and works on his piece, memorizes it, and then on stage performs. So this being surrendered, you can practice it in the intimacy of your bedroom or of your meditation room or whenever you have the leisure to do that. But then when life requires for you to be active, then don't hesitate and go for it. Go for it. Because then you will learn from there. Brendan, I was wondering about this belief that we are separate and how it veils our true nature. I do like the analogy of how we forget that we are the dreamers as a way to explain it. However, if this belief manifests from consciousness and is made of consciousness, even as a game, it is never not consciousness. So, how can it really forget itself? In the same way as the mind forgets itself in the night dream. In the night dream, the mind remains the mind. It remains the creator of the friends who appears out of nowhere at the door of your house and comes as a surprise to you, in spite of the fact that you are the creator of this surprise. So the friend, the surprise, all of that is mind. And the mind is the creator of that. Apparently, you have forgotten that you have created the surprise. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a surprise. It is the same here. You forget that you create. As you create, you forget. As you create, you perceive. You see, really, it could be said also, we can never fully forget what we are, because we are it. The fact that we are it liberates us from the burden of having to remember, because we will always be it. It's better to be than to remember. I'm going to stop here, and next Sunday I will answer the remaining question from Inge, from Rose, from Christian, from Sarah. Thank you.